We like to believe that four walls and a locked door are enough to keep the world out. We build our sanctuaries in the quiet corners of the earth, deep in the woods, or in the vast, empty stretches of the countryside. Some of us can't wait for the weekend so we can escape to a national park or a remote campsite. But isolation is a double-edged sword. Join me by the campfire tonight as I share with you some of the creepiest middle-of-nowhere horror stories I have ever read. Pull up a seat. I hope you're ready for this. I was 11 when this happened. Anna, my older sister, was 14, and Becky, my younger sister, was 8. My dad was a freelance programmer when I was younger. He made great money on his jobs, but because he was so heavily in debt, $500,000 plus, and my mom was not the most gifted person on balancing a budget, we never had much free money available. This meant that we went on a vacation once every few years, and usually that was to a relative's house. My dad had just finished a long project for a big client, and we were celebrating the occasion with a new movie, Final Destination, because my dad loved watching scary stuff and scaring the daylights out of my sisters and I. We were in the middle of the movie when the phone rang. He went to get it and came back to grab my mom while we kept watching the movie. Becky took the opportunity to pause the film and take Duchess, our dog, captive because she was scared. They came back about 10 minutes later and announced that we were going to be spending the weekend in a cabin. We didn't know what to make of that, but apparently the client he'd been helping owned a nice cabin by a lake in the mountains and offered to let us lodge there that weekend for a considerably reduced price. It was Thursday, so my mom went into a panicked frenzy of packing so we didn't see the rest of the movie that night. After school the next day, we packed up the family van and headed to the mountains. It was a 2.5-hour drive, so it was late by the time we got there. We unloaded the van and went exploring in the cabin. It was a ranch-style cabin with a little nook thing you could climb up to that was about head height. It was about 3 feet tall and probably meant for storage, but it was an excellent place for the three of us to hang out in and play games. There were a few dozen board games up there, so we started playing once we decided on the rooms. My mom and dad got the largest one. Anna claimed the smaller one with a twin bed, so Becky and I got the last room, which had a queen-sized bed we could share. We had a window on the right side of the bed without a curtain, and a lamp on the left side of the bed. It was the only light source in the room, and there was a closet opposite the bed. It was locked, and we couldn't get in it. I never did figure out what was inside there. We went to bed at around 11. Becky is a kicker, so I slept by the lamp in case she ended up knocking it over. I remember lying down, and I must have instantly fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, Becky was gripping my arm and trying to burrow under me. She was squeaking something in fright, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I sat up, looked towards her, and I saw something pale and human-shaped moving away from the window. My sleepy brain took several moments to process that, and then I was shooting out of bed and dragging Becky with me. We rushed to our parents, who told us we were imagining things. My mom told us to go back to bed, and if we saw anything else, to let them know. I, much to my current annoyance, agreed with them and went back into the room with Becky. We switched positions because she refused to go back to bed by the window. I told her a story to get her to sleep and promptly conked out after her. I didn't wake up until morning. The next day, we went exploring around the lake for about an hour before my dad decided we'd spend the day in town. They had a lot of small shops, and my parents went into every one of them. We ate lunch and dinner in the town, and finally went back to the cabin. Anna made a joke about something as we neared the cabin, and I remember everybody laughing before my dad suddenly held up his hand to make everyone stop. He took another step towards the cabin and pushed the door open with a single finger. I thought it was strange that the door wasn't latched, but I didn't put the obvious together right away. "Dad," Anna said as she shuffled nearer to Belle and I, but my dad gave his head a shake to let her know she needed to be quiet. He went into the cabin and disappeared inside for a minute or two while we stood on the porch. My mom called out his name and he called back that we could come inside. We did, and found him standing in the middle of the living room/dining room with a frown on his face. He locked the door once we were inside, and he took my mom to the bedroom for a quick chat. Anna, having caught on to what was happening, opted to distract Becky and I by suggesting another round of the board game we'd been playing the previous night. We hadn't been playing for more than 5 minutes when my mom and dad came back. My mom went about cleaning the dishes from breakfast while my dad joined our game. We played for a few hours before Dad told us we needed to go to bed. It was only 9 at that point, which made Anna mad. She was allowed to stay up until 10:30 on school nights and later on the weekend nights. Becky and I got into bed while they argued. We climbed back into the same spots we slept in, Becky by the window and I by the lamp. I read to Belle for a bit before we drifted off. I woke to my dad rushing into our room. He scooped Becky out of the bed and grabbed my hand. He dragged me out of the room and into the hall where I saw Anna getting similar treatment by my mom. I became aware of a high-pitched whine in the living room and saw our dog sitting at attention by the back door. She was bristled and seemed anxious. My dad didn't put Becky down and didn't let go of my hand. They rushed out of the house and into the van. My dad went back to get our dog, and then he burned rubber getting out of the cabin. He drove all the way back home without saying a word. It took a half hour for Duchess to calm down. He told Anna what happened the next day, but Becky and I didn't find out until years later. He'd woken up that night to what sounded like moaning outside the window in his room. He jumped up and looked to see what was going on, and he found the front door unlocked. Stuff in the kitchen had been moved, and Duchess started to growl at the back door, which was ajar. He locked it and got us out of the house. He went back the next day to get our luggage and found several pairs of footprints outside the window of the room that Belle and I slept in. I live in a small town. You blink and you miss it. Best we can boast about is a single stop sign and a gas station, which we only have because of the nearby highway. Any actual semblance of a town is 25 minutes away. So when things get scary out here, it's amplified. The occasional homeless person is no big deal. They're often drifting through. Drug addicts run rampant and will steal everything they can from your house, but it's the normal out here. However, what happened a few years ago certainly wasn't normal. Originally, I was dead asleep in my bed. I only woke up because it was burning hot in my room, but it was summertime and not much I could do. I just remember tossing and turning until I got a creepy feeling that fell into the pit of my stomach. I glanced over to the bathroom door that was open with the light on. Everything was normal. I left the light on so I wouldn't trip and die if I had to pee in the middle of the night. Next, I glanced at the window directly across from my bed. I had no curtains, but I did have a shitty set of blinds. Parts of the blinds are broken from wear and tear, and the shitty AC output beneath it would make them move back and forth, so you'd get a glimpse of outside every so often. The yard light was still going, but what made me stop was the outline at my window. The figure of someone was directly at my window, almost like it was waiting for the blinds to move to watch me. I didn't have an imagination as a child. That had been trained out of me. But the sight was enough to pour every horror film into my head at that moment. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled my blankets over my head, and I slept in the cloth oven that night. By morning time, the figure was gone. I remember running to my mom's room on the verge of tears in the morning, telling her what had happened. She laughed at me like I was an idiot and told me that it was probably just a stray cat that had climbed up there for one odd reason or another. I almost believed her, since my window was pretty high off the ground, but something didn't sit right. Later that day, when we were doing yard work, I glanced over at my window, and I saw one of our metal patio chairs had been pushed up to it. I pointed it out to my mom, who proceeded to chew me out. That's how the cat probably got up there, moron. Stop leaving furniture everywhere. But I hadn't moved it. It was heavy enough that I struggled with it, so we moved it back. And so began a pattern. At night, I'd see the figure, complain to my mom, and we'd find a chair moved back every single morning. This went on for a few weeks. My mother stopped caring about my concerns until one morning we saw where the outside screen of my window had been sliced open. I still remember her shaking her head and complaining about those damn stray cats that we had still yet to see. I could tell she was unnerved by that development. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I opted to sleep in our living room that night. The only problem was our kitchen and living room connected, which meant there were always several windows. The first night of my move went well, despite my back hurting from the couch. I avoided my room like the plague. It wasn't until about 4 days later we ran into an issue. I woke up and glanced at the clock above the fireplace. It read a little past 3 a.m. I couldn't realize why I'd woken up until it happened again. There was a beam of light shining in from the kitchen window, almost like someone was shining a flashlight in. I saw it trace along the windows and land on the love seat across from the couch I was on. I was mortified. When I told my mom, she continued to laugh at me. I gave in and decided I would sleep in my dad's room, even though it had a gigantic window. He slept in the recliner with a huge TV, so I felt more safe having someone around. The yard light was directly outside the window anyways. It seemed foolproof. That was until I woke up out of habitual fear and watched through the window across from the bed. Everything seemed normal as time drug on, and I felt like a moron. Maybe my mom was right. That was until I saw a lone figure come out of the woods by the backyard shed, walk directly under the light, and head to the patio furniture like he'd been there plenty of times before. I still remember the large build the man had, and the confidence like he was the one who lived here and wasn't creeping around in my yard in the dead of night. I just remember listening to the TV until I fell asleep again, hoping to get another glimpse. My dad would have been pissed if I'd woken him up. He was grumpy on a good day and terrifying on a bad day. I didn't feel like risking it unless I had solid proof, because I was scared. The next morning, my mom chewed me out again for the patio furniture, which was routine almost a month later. But this time, something new happened. She demanded I stop playing in the toolboxes of the garage. A bunch of tools had been taken out and left on our doorstep. Screwdrivers, a large hammer, flashlights, whatever else. It wasn't me. I begged with my mom and pleaded with her, just stay up with me one night. We couldn't close our garage because it was an open carport, and I wasn't going to get my ass beaten for touching tools because of someone else. It was driving me mad. Finally, she agreed. That night, we would stay awake in the living room. I finally fell asleep before my mom did, but I remember her waking me up in a panic. She pointed to the window that overlooked into our garage. We could see the top of someone's head as they walked back and forth. There was a sound of someone placing metal tools down on the brick steps, as if they were trying to be quiet but couldn't fully muffle it. She whispered for me to go wake my dad. My dad was angry, having been woken up in the middle of the night by his frantic daughter. He grabbed his pistol and headed out from the back door towards the front of the house where the garage was located. We heard my dad screaming and someone dropping tools, then the shots of a gun, twice. The frantic footsteps pounding out of the garage felt like they were coming from out of my chest. My mom peeked out the window, then opened the door. My dad stumbled in. He had missed both shots because of his unstable aim, but he told us that there was a man crouching at our front door, looking at our door handle. None of us slept that night, and in the morning, the law from the closest town arrived. They didn't do much besides ask if anything had been stolen, for a description of the man, and then told us to install cameras. That was it. They said the guy was probably just looking for something easy to steal for quick money. If that had been the case, why hadn't he stolen the tools, the generator, the welder, or broken into any of the vehicles just sitting in the garage? We finally set up hunting trail cameras around the house, but nothing has happened since. Coming home from college for holidays, I still have nightmares about the incident years later when I sleep in my own bed. I don't know what he was looking for or why he did the things he did. Whatever the case may be, man at the window, let's not meet. This happened to me when I was at elementary school. It would usually take me about 30 minutes to walk home from school. I lived close to the seafront, so it was always a nice walk. On the way home, there were 2 sets of traffic lights on a big 2-lane road. My school was by the seaside. I loved it. I used to walk in a group of close friends of about 3 or 4. We used to chat about the latest fads and fashions, homework, that sort of thing. It was a really fun time when I think back to it. It was summertime in my 3rd year of elementary school. As usual, I was waiting for my friends outside of school by the playground after school finished. I noticed an old man in a white car staring at me through his open window. At first, I thought he was a child because he was a very short and petite man. He was so sunken in his seat that I could barely see him, not to mention he had his cap pulled down just above his eyes. I remember that the cap had a logo on it. His skin was slightly sunburned too. He looked between 40 and 50 years old. He fully rolled his window down, leaned over the passenger seat and called out, "Hi, I'm sorry to tell you, but your dad has been involved in an accident. He's been rushed to the hospital. I'm one of your dad's friends, and I'm here to take you to see him in the hospital." Of course, when you hear something as terrible as that, it's going to shock you. But I had never met this old man before. When you're younger and an adult tells you to get in the car, you listen, right? I didn't know what to do. What was I supposed to do right now? My legs were frozen solid. At this point, one of my friends arrived. I began to tell her about what I had just heard from the old man in the car, but our conversation was interrupted. "Hurry up, your dad is waiting for you," ordered the old man in the white car. My friend and I just said nothing. "Your dad asked me to come and get you," he called. Those words upset me. I didn't know him, but I was so worried about my dad. I was only in the 3rd year of elementary school. I was so confused and very wary of the situation. Something in my gut told me that this was very dangerous. This standoff between us and the old man in the car went on for about 10 minutes until he said, "Fine, don't get in. I hope your dad forgives you." He rolled up the window and started the car and drove off. I watched the car driving away. I had conflicting feelings of guilt for not accepting the ride with him to see my father in hospital, yet I strongly felt that it wasn't safe. After a while, my friend and I decided to head home as usual. I was nervous all the way home as we walked along the seafront. I got home and spoke to my mother about what had happened. She confirmed that the creepy old man was a liar. She reported this to the school and the police. She looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "I am so glad you didn't get in that man's car." The next day at school, all the students were gathered and given a warning about that strange man. and told what happened to me. The teacher explained that if you see an older man wearing a cap in a white car, and he tells you that a family member or friend has gotten into an accident and he will take you to the hospital, do not believe him and get away from him as fast as possible. I found out at a later date that a child had gone missing not too far from our school, and the child's whereabouts are unknown. It was said that the child had been tricked into getting into a stranger's car, and the police were currently conducting an investigation. I don't know how that case ended, but I do pray that the child was returned safely and the perpetrator was arrested. What would have happened to me if I had gotten into that car? I'm much older now, but I think about this often, and when I do, I always break out in goosebumps. To start this off, I need to give some context. I'm 23, and I currently live in New York City, but I have grandparents who live down in rural West Virginia. When I say rural, I mean the literal boonies. Their closest neighbors are over an hour away in a small town with a few houses and a Walmart. Last summer, my grandfather, Robert, had surgery done on his hip. The majority of my family lives on the West Coast, and my grandmother, Muriel, is very old and wouldn't have been able to take care of Robert. Because I was the closest family member, I agreed to come down there for 2 weeks while he recovered from his surgery. Fast forward a week. Everything was going fine. All I really had to do was help my grandfather up and down the stairs and walk his dog, a blue heeler named Rocky. Normally, my grandfather would walk Rocky once in the morning and once at night through the woods behind their property, but because of his surgery, that responsibility fell onto me. This was the part that I hated about helping him, because ever since I was a kid, I never liked those woods behind the property. Whenever I'd go down there as a kid, my cousins and I would always get creeped out going into that forest. It always just felt off for some reason. Anyways, for the first week, walking Rocky in the forest at night was fine, even if a bit creepy. That was until one night, a week into my stay, I was walking him through the forest. It was around 8:30, and the sun was setting over the Appalachian Mountains. Everything was going normal, until I heard a strange whistle that sounded like it was only around 20 yards away. Both the dog and I stopped dead in our tracks, and we looked towards the direction the whistling came from. I shined my flashlight in the direction, but I didn't see anything, so I just assumed it was a bird. Looking back, it definitely wasn't a bird. There's no nocturnal birds that chirp and whistle out there, and it sounded more musical than anything a bird could whistle. But the dog was spooked. He wouldn't stop growling and staring at whatever was back there, and he kept trying to back up until whatever or whoever this thing was whistled again, to which the dog started barking and going crazy. At this point, I decided that I definitely didn't want to stay there, so I yanked on the dog's leash, and we both bolted out of the woods and straight back home. When we got back, I told my grandparents what happened. They both seemed spooked, and my grandmother immediately asked if I whistled back. I told her that I didn't, and she seemed relieved, but she told me that I didn't hear anything and to just ignore it. I asked why, and she wouldn't tell me, and would instead just tell me that I didn't hear anything. I decided not to press on it any further and went to bed, terrified and wondering what she seemed so freaked out about. The next morning, she told me that instead of walking Rocky through the woods, I could just take him on laps around the house. So that's what I started doing. Every night, I would take Rocky for about 50 laps around the house before going back inside. On Friday, the third to last day I would be there, at night, I was taking the dog for laps as usual until I heard that same creepy whistle behind the attached garage, which was only around 10 yards from the house. This time, I immediately took the dog back inside and locked the doors. The rest of the night, I put my earbuds in and I ignored any more whistling like my grandmother told me to. To this day, I still don't know what was whistling in those woods. Some of my friends say it was a skinwalker, but that's a Navajo thing, and there's almost no Navajo in West Virginia. My girlfriend, who stayed back in New York, asked her Muslim parents who are from Yemen, and they said whistling at night is a sign that a jinn is nearby. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was had my grandparents legitimately scared. I've heard of weird shit happening in Appalachia, but this is the first time that I've ever had a first-hand experience with it. Does anyone have any idea what this could have been? This is truly the scariest, most horrible thing that has ever happened to me. I've never been so petrified in my life. To this day, I still don't know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he's still where I saw him. I'm sorry for how long the geographical description is. I just want everyone to understand how secluded I was when this happened, and how badly it could have ended if it wasn't for my parents. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting university. Our home was, and still is, just outside of a small town with forests all around. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forests there well. I knew where I could cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The walk I would go on always led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles' walk, at which point the stream was hidden quite deep into the forest. I'd continue to walk north and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in the forest because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water. It goes up and down, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there alone or with my dad over the span of 18 years. I never saw anybody else in the forest. I went there twice that summer, both times alone-ish. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well, wondered if it was a lost hunting dog, and started moving towards the sound. Yeah, I bloody know I'd be the first person to die, but I was heading north anyway, so what the hell? I realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was to be on a collar. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me. It stopped completely after 5 minutes. The stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell that could have been enclosed in a tin or something, and the river was too far still. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to have been a person. I stopped thinking about it and just walked on normally. That is until I found a badger, a dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh. The body was still limp, and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream. So had I. So, the badger was put there, maybe killed there, at least decapitated while I was walking that way, I suppose. I'm not completely sure. Nothing else happened that day. 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home around 6 p.m. I made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour. Then I decided to go back the way I came because it was getting late, and it was raining quite heavily. The sun set at around 9 p.m. I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open part of the forest when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with his head strung to his front paws. That area looked a bit like ham because of the way it was tied, just swinging from a tree, like an almost literal load of bollocks. It was this putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid in my hair. It was repulsive. At first, I just stared at it, slightly gobsmacked. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. I was soaking from the rain. My senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I walked the same way to get to the river. So someone had strung up the body after I'd passed it on the way there. Someone knew I'd seen it. So, was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream, back towards the path for a while, when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad while running. I told him where to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me, to go as fast as he could, and that someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was like I had just shit out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise despite being soaked. It was dark. I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still a bit far away. It was just too far to feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than the last time, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear, combined with my compromised hearing, and the fact that I couldn't fucking breathe properly, was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I stayed on the phone with my mom, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mom was screaming on the phone at the same time that they were on the path that I needed to run, that my dad had gotten out and was heading east from the path bend. I was terrified, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half-running, half-speed-walking thing again because I was out of breath. Then I heard branches break. Clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell ringing louder. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I fucking didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could. I lied. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on the path. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell, Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. I felt like this man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping and wheezing, crying so hard and screaming for my dad. I felt shivers on my neck, and then switched off. I just ran. I even dropped my bag and only realized I didn't have it anymore when I was in the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home. Things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears and the bell. I finally heard my dad shout my name, and I knew he was coming my way and that he could see me because of the intonation of his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got to each other. My dad heard the bell too. My mom could hear it on the phone. She was waiting with the car, ready to leave, fast. I'd like to begin by describing myself, because I believe it's relevant to the story. I have to assume that I'm not the average author here. I'm 25, male, and a bit above average height. I've been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week since I've graduated high school. Gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My favorite hobbies are mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I've just recently purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots because it's near the end of the summer season and they were on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few ascents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature with many trails and opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my summer boots last Saturday, more specifically, because it would have been my grandfather's birthday, and he also loved to hike before he died. These boots are overkill for these woods, but I needed to try them. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just the day before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people, as they are easily scared off by the weather. Since the summer was excruciatingly hot, it was a nice change of temperature, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. In the not-so-distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me on this hike, but she's turning 14 this year, and she doesn't enjoy long-distance walks anymore. My girlfriend had to do something for work on short notice, so I knew from the moment I woke up I would be doing the hike alone. The first half of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference along the trail is minimal. I barely broke a sweat, and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met at most 6 to 7 people during the first 2 to 3 hours, and most of them were cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped on many occasions to take pictures or study some animals' tracks. There are deer and wild boars in these woods. Nothing more menacing, not animals anyway. But I won't get ahead of myself. Between 12 and 1, the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest, and can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest, so cars seldom go here. My trail required me to take this road for a few hundred meters. As I was walking along the road, I heard a car approach from behind me. It went past me, not too quickly or too slowly. It was an older, green SUV with a fresh registration. You can tell by the license plate, probably an import. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it drive back. It drove past me for the second time, now very slowly, and I could clearly see 2 men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. Both had a stubble/beard game going on as well. I assumed they were gamekeepers, even though those cars have a crest on the hood and on both front doors. As I hike a fair amount, I know these things. I see them around quite a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this. They have Jeeps which are more suitable for the forest. Still, I felt no discomfort, and again, I thought nothing of it. Then, my trail left the asphalt road and began snaking in the woods again. I walked ahead serenely, gazing at trees and whatnot. Then, I suddenly had the strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. An engine sound was becoming more and more clear as well. At this point, the trail was quite narrow, but if, for whatever reason, you'd want to drive a car on it, you could, just about. Now, when I turned around, the aforementioned SUV was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped just as I had. I looked at the driver, who was staring back, as I can only assume as he was wearing sunglasses. I calmly asked him, "What's wrong? Shall I let you go?" In a polite tone as his window was rolled down. He didn't speak. He slowly started reversing, and he soon disappeared behind a curve. Now I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he was alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still, since I wasn't sure what was going on. At this point, I was not scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and bad thoughts began gathering in the back of my mind. I heard the car and the engine stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing from that point on. I turned around and began walking towards my destination at a much faster pace than before. Now I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer, and why he just reversed and left without a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again, or to see him again for that matter. I had just walked enough for these unpleasant thoughts to slowly be erased from my mind. As I had been drinking a lot of water as I usually do, I decided to take a piss. I saw a perfect spot, a very narrow path off my trail that led quite clearly to a little hunting tower. I walked over to the tower, put my bag down by the ladder that led up to it, and then began pissing. I was also interested in checking Google Maps to see where I was, but since there was no signal, I decided to check my map. I also had a sip of water. I'd been standing there for a good few minutes before I headed back to the trail from where I deviated to take a leak. Right before I arrived back to the main trail, I thought to myself how extremely quiet it was. No wind, no noise of any kind. Absolutely nothing. This made me realize, just a moment later, how alone I was, except for the man who was standing maybe 50 meters away from me on the trail, in the direction where I was headed. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on that trail, since the small one to the tower was well hidden by trees, and you couldn't see the main trail as it was running perpendicularly to the small one. I looked at him, and I was instantly chilled to the bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing with a baseball hat on his head. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point, I was fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident with the SUV, I would have probably walked along the trail, thinking he's a hunter. However, in light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in these woods this time of year. I figured, in the matter of 2 seconds, that I was going to sprint through the woods until exhaustion, towards and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in 2 minutes. If I'm right, It's the best call I will have ever made. And for fuck's sake, he began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I began sprinting away. I sprinted past the tower and deep into the bushes, not sparing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through branches, small trees, and slipped on several occasions. I really did sprint until I was exhausted. It must have been several kilometers. I even crossed some smaller trails, but didn't even bother to look either way. My pulse was 1,000,000,000 the whole time. I began checking my phone for signal, but nothing. I was already really angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. After a while, I began power walking, but still off trail, straight ahead, in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone got signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me seriously. They said I was overreacting and whatnot, saying, "You must have misunderstood the situation." Well, I'll let you decide if I did or not. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a cute little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like eternity, but I walked the last kilometer to the main square, took off my jumper and put it in my bag. At least I looked a little different, from far away. I waited for a bus that took me back to a station near my car, rather anxiously, I must admit. After the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road, I walked back to my car, got in, and drove home. My dog welcomed me like I was coming back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are just amazing. She must have felt that something shook me up. I spent the afternoon contemplating my life in the bathtub. The boots destroyed my feet, but they aren't meant to be sprinted in for large periods of time. I called the forest gamekeeper's office. I inquired about whether they have such cars in service as the one I came across. They do not. Their gamekeepers also don't typically work in pairs. Like 99.9% of the time, they are alone. I told them my story, and they took me a lot more seriously than my friends, but they assured me that the police wouldn't. No one could have been legally hunting in the area during summer either. I've been keeping up with local news, but nothing extraordinary has been reported yet. I really hope nothing will be reported either. So, gentlemen in the empty forest at lunchtime, let's not meet again. Hey all, so I just got back from a trip to New York City. I go there multiple times a year as I have family and a handful of close friends that live there. I've been meaning to post this since it happened a couple of nights ago, but I wanted to make sure I had the time to sit down and regather all the details correctly. I'm sure we've all heard crazy subway stories at one point or another, but I never thought I would end up in one this terrifying. So I was heading back to my hotel from a friend's house at about 3 a.m. the other night. My friend lives deep in Brooklyn. My hotel was in Manhattan, so if you know the city, you know that's about a 30 to 45-minute long train ride, give or take. My train finally arrived, and I was happy to be headed home. I was exhausted and it was late. My trip had been going unexpectedly well up until this point, so I had faith I'd be able to get home with no worries, especially since the trains and streets were basically empty at this hour. The train was brand new, and it had just been cleaned, something I've never seen before. Hell, it even smelled like a new car and still had fresh mop water on the floor. There was only about 3 other people on my train, all minding their own business. So far, so good. About 2 stops into the train ride, a man that looked like he was in his late 20s stumbled into our train car mid-ride through the connecting doors of the cars. He had on a Nike ski mask, which usually isn't a good sign on a nice 70-degree night in general context, but I'm not one to judge by appearances. Plus, I know the shiesty mask is sort of a trend nowadays, so I didn't think too much of it at first. He sort of hobbled in and he was clutching his stomach, almost as if he was concealing something or hiding a wound. His eyes were bloodshot red, and at first I thought it was because he was high or something. He immediately hobbled into the nearest corner and sort of sulked into the corner, facing it, until the next stop. He then ran out the closest door and erupted into the most painful crying I've ever heard. He was just screaming and moaning and crying, all while stumble running along the stopped train on the platform, still clutching his stomach, screaming things like, "Why?" and gasping through his tears. Keep in mind, I'm sitting in the middle of the train facing away from the side he got off, so I'm kind of breaking my neck as he's running behind me so I can watch what's going on. He then ran back inside the same car, through the door on the opposite side of the car now. He was on my right before, and now he's on my left. There's no one in between me and him now since everyone was closer to the right side. He did the skulking while facing into the corner on the other side of the car now, but this time he kept scream crying and yelling things like, "Why?" again, but he was crying so hysterically that it was hard to make out a lot of what he was saying. From the certain words I gathered, though, I'm almost positive that a very close friend of his had just gotten killed or something. It's the only thing that would explain the way he was acting and the things he was saying. Plus, he was suited up like he'd just come back from a street mission gone bad or something. At this point, everyone on the train was frantically flicking their eyes over to him every few seconds. You could tell they were panicked, but not trying to cause a scene about it or rile him up. I was getting a little stressed out myself, but I'd seen and heard about worse on the subway, and if someone he knew had really just died, then I felt horrible for the guy before anything else. But then the entire situation escalated to a point that I'd only seen in movies or crime shows until now. The man stayed in the corner, crying, screaming, and muttering things to himself for another 3 minutes or so, all while still clutching his stomach as if he was concealing something. I'd definitely seen a black object in his hands by this point, but I couldn't tell if it was big enough to be a gun or not. After I saw this, I tried not to take my eyes off of him for too long at a time, since I was the closest person to him, but I also didn't want to stare. By this point, he was starting to say concerning things like, "Someone's gotta pay for this," and then he would just repeat it louder and louder. And then, he burst into a dialogue that made my heart fucking drop. Keep in mind, he's still facing the corner, hunched over clutching his item. "All you motherfuckers sitting on this train right now, you're all gonna feel me tonight. You hear me? You're all gonna feel me tonight. And you're all gonna fucking hate it too. Oh my god. You're all gonna fucking hate this. You're all gonna hate me." He kept getting louder and louder as he was saying this, to the point where he was basically screaming by the last part. I don't know what he said after that, because as soon as that train stopped next, I fucking bolted. He was screaming shit at me as I got off, but I couldn't hear it, and I definitely wasn't going to turn back. I ran back up to the nearest street exit, chain-smoked a couple of cigarettes, and waited 20 minutes for the next train to come. I've seen enough in my life to know that this wasn't a situation that I was willing to gamble with at all. I pray the last 3 people on that train got home safe and nothing happened. I briefly searched Twitter and the news the next day for any possible information I could find, and I couldn't find anything, but who even knows what's worth a headline anymore? So, to the man in the subway at 3 a.m., I pray you find the solace you need and heal from whatever trauma you're going through. Please, let's not ever meet again. This was about 10 years ago, but I remember it clearly. At the time, I was working swing shift, so I would get off of work downtown at 12 a.m. and had to wait 30 minutes for a bus. which took an additional 30 minutes to get to the stop closest to my house, which was a little under a mile away. I rode this bus every night, and it was usually fairly empty aside from myself and a few other people getting off retail jobs who I'd see pretty often. This happened during the holidays, so stores were open really late and the closing employees rode my bus. But I was at the last stop on the line, and I was usually the last person on the bus. This night, the same people as always got on the bus and got off at their regular stops. The second to last stop, I noticed that another guy was still on the bus. Another guy I'd never seen before, and I saw that he was watching me. I was 18 years old at the time, dressed in sort of clunky clothes. I worked at a homeless shelter, so I never dressed up nice or anything, but still occasionally drew the attention of creeps on the bus because I was a girl alone late at night. Whatever, I thought to myself. I'd usually just tell creepy guys to fuck off, and at the very worst, they'd be like, "You're a bitch," and that was the end of that. By 18, I dealt with it plenty of times, so I wasn't particularly upset by this. But this creepy guy was sort of different. He was an overweight Middle Eastern guy dressed in a knit sweater, slacks, and wire-frame glasses. He didn't say a word the entire time we were on the bus. He just stared, never breaking his gaze, just transfixed on me. Finally, we got to my stop, the last stop, and he was still sitting in the back of the bus, watching me as I got off. I thanked the bus driver, got off, and realized that the guy was still on the bus. I started walking up the hill to my house like I always do, and I noticed that the bus was still sitting at the stop instead of pulling out and putting on its "to terminal" sign like it normally did. Weird, sure, but I kept walking. I'd made it about 500 feet. I heard the bus pull out and drive off, and then I heard someone running up behind me. Without even looking back, I knew it was the guy from the bus. He was 50 feet behind me at this point. I could hear him having to catch his breath, and he yelled out, "Princess, please wait." And of course, I didn't wait. I just kept going. But he didn't stop. He kept yelling, "Please, please, princess, I want to make love to you. I have money. Please, I will pay you." I didn't stop walking. I didn't want to make eye contact or acknowledge him. But I'm also walking down a dark street with no cars and no people. And he is hot on my trail, but can't keep up with me, and seems pretty winded. By the time I made it down the block, he was yelling at the top of his lungs, "Princess, princess, please let me make love to you. I will pay you. Just stop. Princess, please, please," and started sobbing. I mean absolutely wailing, all while yelling that he wanted to make love to me and would pay me for it, and calling me princess. He wouldn't stop sobbing, and he was so loud, I'm surprised he didn't wake anyone in the neighborhood up. At this point, he's still 50 feet behind me and crying. I was 5 blocks from my house, and I didn't want to let the guy know where I lived, so I decided to call 911. He kept loudly crying and sobbing and pleading to me. I let the dispatcher know that some guy was following me and propositioning me and crying, and she could hear him sobbing in the background, and said a deputy would be there soon. I yelled at the guy, "I just called the cops, so leave me the fuck alone." And he just stopped, standing there, still sobbing. I keep walking, but slowly since I'm so close to my house. A couple minutes pass, and there's lights. A sheriff was coming down the street, and when I turned around, the crying guy was nowhere to be found. The officer asked if I wanted him to go look for him, or if I just wanted a ride home. I didn't ever want to deal with that guy again, so I accepted the ride and asked him to just check out the area around my house after he dropped me off, since it's pretty unusual to see an overweight guy in a sweater and slacks wandering around crying at 1:30 a.m. on a weeknight in a residential area. I have no idea if they found him. No idea what would happen if they did find him, since I'm not sure if anything he did was actually illegal or just creepy as hell. Needless to say, I deadbolted my house and stayed up all night talking to a friend in a different time zone until it was morning. So, guy from the bus, let's not meet again. I was around 16 at the time of this happening. Firstly, I'd like to explain what type of person I am, just so my actions make a bit of sense. I'm an average-looking girl, a bit overweight, which for my country makes me really undesirable. For this reason, I'm not used to men hitting on me or even considered it a possible occurrence back then. You can say that I'm usually the man in our group. You know, the girl that looks after every other friend when they're drinking, and if a guy's being rude or harassing someone, I'm the one to shut him down. I don't know why I took on this role, probably because my friends are way too naive and nice. Well, I'm like that to strangers when I'm alone. I always try to be helpful to people if they look confused or ask me for directions or anything else. On this particular night, I was going home from school. My high school is in the city center, and I take the bus home. Since the buses get overcrowded during peak hours, and I really hate being between crowds of people, I normally wait around 30 minutes to an hour to catch the bus. This night, I walked to another bus stop, around 5 stops before the one to my school, so I can kill time and take an empty bus. It was dark, and I was the only one at that bus stop. I usually don't have a problem with going out alone late at night, as I don't have the men, bad, assault mentality drilled into me. So I'm just minding my own business when this 45 to 50-year-old man comes up to me. He has a very friendly face and a smile, so I don't think anything of it. He asks me something, and then I realize he's Turkish. I tell him I don't understand, so he uses basic Bulgarian words he knows, and I somehow understand that he's just asking for directions. Of course, I try my best to explain, and after I feel like he understood, I expect him to just stop talking to me. No, he sat disturbingly close to me and started to talk to me, but again in Turkish. I try to be polite and politely ignore him as best as I can, while nodding my head with a smile, looking at the timetable. For some reason, this guy starts asking me for my phone number. At this moment, I realize that this was definitely not a lost foreigner. I try to shut him down, saying I don't have a phone. Don't ask why I thought that was going to work. I finally give in and give him a random number. He says something else to me, again in Turkish, and then the worst happens. All this time, I'm looking at the 1 minute the bus will be coming in. I'm praying for him to please not try to call the number. Well, he does. And he shows me and asks me why my phone isn't ringing. My stomach flips. I try to think of something fast. Then I remembered that I have my old Motorola in my bag. I usually brought it to school to give to teachers who collected phones during class. I also liked playing games on it. In 2014, that is. Fortunately, the battery was dead, so I just pretended that this is the reason the call isn't going through. I see the guy try to argue, but at this moment, the bus comes and I get on. I sit on the seat behind the driver as always. After 10 minutes, I get this weird feeling. I don't know what it was, but I felt watched. So I look around, but since I'm in the front seat, I can't exactly see everything. Luckily, our buses have this gigantic mirror on the inside that shows everybody on the bus. I look into that mirror, and I can clearly see him. He's sitting on the last seat, his leg clearly visible. I start to panic. I'm not sure he's following me, but I'm also a very cautious person, so I can't really ignore this. I start checking for him at every stop, and he's still there. I get paranoid and say fuck it, and I get off the bus. The stop was at our local mall, and luckily it was open until 10 p.m. I decide to go in, and if he follows, then I'll try to sneak out. He follows all right. You have to understand that in my town, almost nobody goes out after 9 p.m., so the mall is close to empty. I look around, thinking of ways to disappear, but there's just no way. The mall is an open space. There are 3 floors, all almost empty. I'd be easily spotted anywhere I go. Now, you'll probably say, you should have asked the security for help. No, in Bulgaria, we don't do that. That literally never even went through my mind. The security is just some grandpa that walks around all day. They don't actually do work or anything. If it were today, I might not be as stupid, but back then, this wasn't even an option in my head. And besides, security wasn't even around. So, I do the most logical thing I can do, and I decide to utilize the knowledge I had acquired in the previous week. You see, the mall had a cool corridor system behind the stores. It was completely unmarked by any signs, and if you didn't know where you were going, you'd probably get lost, because it's just endless white corridors that lead to empty rooms for storage or some other stuff. Well, me, being an avid anime fan, loved going around these corridors and pretending I'm a ninja from Naruto on a mission. So, I can proudly say that I learned the right path to the back stairway of the mall. Because I was smart and obsessed with the idea of being a spy, I decided to lure this creepy guy into the corridors and then just exit from the back end of the mall. I first entered H&M and pretended to look around, just to see if he was really stalking me. He didn't even try to hide it. He stood outside the store, just staring in. I got really scared for a moment, but then I remembered I'm like the best 007 agent out there. So I just continued walking around the mall. I finally entered the corridors, and at this point, I booked it to the staircase. I ran out, and then didn't stop running for 2 bus stops. I tried looking back, but there was no one. So I proudly decided that I was a hero and went home. Today, being a 21-year-old grown-up, I just think about how stupid that is, and how I'd probably be 10 times as scared today than I was back then. Well, I hope it never comes to that. I have a lot of creepy things that have happened to me. I might get around to writing the rest. I am no longer a skeptic. My wife and I stayed at an Airbnb that was a house built in 1901 in an old mining town in Arizona. The experiences we had made us leave a day early at 3:30 a.m. The town is called Bisbee, Arizona. It's a small town tucked into the mountains near the Mexican border, less than 20 miles away from the famed town of Tombstone. I'll give a brief history, but if you ever want to fall down an internet rabbit hole, the town's full history is pretty fascinating. Copper and other valuable minerals were discovered there in 1877, and a mining camp sprung up. The population swelled significantly over the next couple of decades, and at one point, the population was bigger than San Francisco. The problem was that they crammed this population into what is effectively a canyon. The town is literally built into the sides of the canyon, with front door steps leading to your neighbor's roof in the lot below. With the population surge came crime, disease, sanitation issues, and whatever else. Not to mention the toxic fumes and smoke that came with the mining operations. People were making money hand over fist while living in absolute squalor and misery for quite some time. They mined there continuously until 1974 and dug one of the largest open pit mines in America. When the copper ran out, the mining company up and left and basically sold the whole town back to the townspeople, and they turned it into a fun, artsy hippie party town. Some world-renowned artists lived there, including comedian Doug Stanhope. This year was the third year in a row my wife and I had gone down there for the 4th of July. The trip had become sort of a tradition. This year we stayed at an Airbnb that was a house built in 1901. It was actually one of the first houses built on the main street through town. I'd like to preface that overall, I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I've always found it entertaining, but felt that ultimately it was probably bullshit. My wife also felt the same way. It would take a very concrete experience for me to fully believe. Well, let me tell you about my experiences over the past couple of days and nights that changed my outlook quite a bit. So, the first evening we were there, we were just kind of milling about, deciding what we were going to do for the evening. I was in the kitchen, and I distinctly heard footsteps on the hardwood floors. I absolutely thought my wife was walking up behind me, and even felt the presence of someone there. I turned around, and there was no one there. She was laying in bed on her phone. We chalked it up to leftover thunder from a storm that had just passed, or maybe even old plumbing. Later that night, when we were getting into bed, we were plugging our phones in and testing out light switches and such. I switched my light on, and we both heard a weird scratching sound on or in the wall. I even jokingly said, "Damn, I hope that's not wires arcing in the walls or something." It definitely wasn't wires arcing, as I am familiar with that sound, but the sound was definitely along the same lines. The next morning at breakfast, my wife mentions that she had trouble sleeping because of very vivid and intense nightmares that took place in the house. She said they were those types of dreams where you're not sure if you're awake or asleep. It was enough to visibly shake her, and she's by no means an easily shaken woman. The next night rolls around, and we go to bed at around 10 p.m. or so. I drifted off to sleep for what felt like maybe 30 minutes or so before I was woken up by multiple itchy/ticklish feelings all over my body. At first I chalked it up to my sensitive skin against the sheets I'm not used to. I've had that happen before, but this time it was different. Every time I would scratch the spot where I had the feeling, it would instantly move to another part of my body. It felt like someone was intentionally trying to aggravate me. I also had slept in the same bed a few times before this with no issue. Dealing with this made me toss and turn for a couple of hours until I finally had it and got up to find my wife awake as well. She was having the same nightmare as the night before, and she couldn't sleep. She also had a deep uneasiness about the mirrors hung around the house. Now that we were awake, she went out on the porch to have a smoke, and I stayed in bed scrolling through my phone, and while I was doing this, I saw a person walk across the foot of my bed out of the corner of my eye. I also felt the presence of someone walking in. The airflow from the AC even changed slightly. It was vivid enough that I 110% thought it was my wife walking in, and my stomach sank like a rock when I realized she was still out on the porch. I thought it might have been a glare from my phone, but I tried every which way to recreate it, and I was unable to. Both of us being unable to sleep, we started talking about stuff. Now, mind you, we rarely, if ever, argue or fight, and we definitely don't get angry and things don't get heated, especially over topics like the ones we were discussing. As the conversation went on, this weird negative energy started to develop, and the conversation started turning south. We both kind of snapped out of it, thought about the events leading up to this, and decided to pack up and nope the fuck out of there. As we were leaving, my wife went back in to grab one last thing and heard multiple footsteps around her and had the distinct feeling she was being chased out. We drove back to Tucson in the dead of night and are both still sitting here, still in a state of shock about what we experienced. This is a story that's really been bothering me lately for absolutely no reason whatsoever. A few months back, I just had this dream that brought back this memory I tried to suppress growing up. But as of recently, it's been weighing on my mind. Growing up in 2005 on the edge of the suburbs, there was a large grove of trees and hills by some railroad tracks that lead to a big forest about half a mile from my house. When I was 9 years old, my neighborhood friend and I would ride our bikes to the railroad tracks and walk to the forest to go explore the random pieces of furniture and junk in this peculiar forest. We'd play card games, do homework, and hang with friends out there for about an hour or two, but we never sat out there too long. There were small abandoned houses here and there in this forest that we stayed away from, as one neighborhood friend, Michael, told me there was a homeless man who lived in one of them, and if you saw him, run. So, right off the bat, after hearing this, going near this house in the woods was scary as could be. One chilly November afternoon, after school, I came home and dropped off my backpack at my house and immediately went to the woods. My bike was broken, so I walked. Michael had told me at school that day to meet him in this open area of the forest to play Pokemon with him. This was something we'd frequently do growing up, just to pass the time until our parents got home at 4 p.m., so it was nothing unusual. As I crossed the railroad tracks into the forest, I instantly felt a weird sensation, that feeling you feel when someone is watching you. I looked all around and couldn't see anyone, so I thought I was just getting spooked, as the rather overcast day was very eerie anyway. Trekking through the autumn leaves scattered across this large wooded area, I came upon the big open area where I was supposed to meet Michael. Near the area where we normally met was his notebook, open. On the page was written, "Hey, I had to go back home and grab some batteries for my Game Boy. Wait for me here, I'll be back soon. Michael." I waited. Being alone, especially feeling like someone was watching me, made this particular moment very uncomfortable. However, I convinced myself I was just being a wuss and decided to wait for Michael. I sat down and began playing my Game Boy. It wasn't too long until that sensation of being watched grew into utter paranoia. I kept frantically looking up from my Game Boy and checking my watch to see how long I'd been waiting. I'd been sitting there for 30 minutes. It was beginning to get dark. Then, I heard some leaves crunch. I looked in the direction of the sound and briefly saw a dark hooded figure peeking from behind a few trees, then hide back behind them. My skin crawled, and I immediately jumped up from where I was sitting, and I froze in my tracks, staring. I screamed, "Hello," to see if anyone was there. I was quickly reminded I wasn't alone when I saw this tall, dirty-looking hooded man peek back around from the trees. He called back, "Hey, buddy." I picked up Michael's notebook and ran for my life. I ran so fast, I barely had time to look behind me. However, I heard leaves crunching not too far behind me. It was the man running after me. He was screaming for me to come back, and "I just wanted to talk to you. I'm sorry." I began crying as I was running, thinking this was exactly how those missing kids disappear. I ran and ran and ran until I literally tripped over the railroad tracks and cut up my knees. Michael was just getting to the railroad tracks. He saw me, dirty and bloody and crying hysterically, and I screamed at him to run. Without question, we ran all the way home. The hooded man was nowhere to be seen once we left the railroad tracks. I last saw him standing in the woods, defeated that he couldn't catch me or something. I don't know. I told Michael everything, and we never went back to the woods ever again. Years later, In 2016, they bulldozed the woods and built a neighborhood there. We later found out from fellow neighborhood friends who were in the area the same thing happened to them growing up. To this day, this is probably one of my scariest stories growing up. I went to one of these matchmaking parties a while back. I was tired of being alone, and I just really wanted to meet a nice guy. I'm a woman, by the way. Now, I realized that I was better off staying alone, and you'll soon find out why I feel that way. It went kind of well, and I actually ended up being asked out by someone. The guy wasn't exactly my type, if I'm being honest. I mean, he was pretty good looking, but I think that he was a little immature for me. Also, he was younger too. I decided to give him a try because he asked me out for a drive, and I thought that was a little more interesting than sitting in a coffee house sharing awkward silences. He came to pick me up in the morning. I got in his car, and we set off for our driving date. We planned on going to a little tourist location with some great views. We were going to have some lunch and then head home in the evening. It was a nice morning and afternoon. He convinced me that he wasn't as immature as I thought he was. It was a fun date. When it started to get dark out, we set about heading back to our hometown. It was when we were driving home that night that I noticed a change in his behavior. He was starting to act strange. The vibes he was putting out were very much, "I don't want you to go yet," and "please don't leave me." I put up with his neediness, expecting him to change his attitude once he noticed that it was making me uncomfortable. But he didn't change. His neediness and his bossiness were strong. The guy who had made me laugh and who I was keen to have a second date with was gone. And now a domineering and controlling guy was sat in the driving seat. We had discussed earlier how we both had work in the morning. I thought about that part of our date as I noticed how dark it was getting out. He wasn't interested in trying to converse with me any longer, nor was he interested in trying to make me smile or laugh. He had created such a horrible atmosphere in the car that I could hardly bring myself to mention to him about how late it was getting. I decided that I would ditch him as soon as I was able to get out of the car. For my plan to work, I just needed him to stop. We were going down dark country lanes. There weren't many opportunities to ask him to stop. I bided my time, and when I saw the lights of a convenience store up ahead, I said aloud the sentence I'd been practicing in my mind for the last 15 minutes. "Hey, do you mind pulling over? I want to use the bathroom," I asked. He agreed, and I thought I'd get away from this weirdo. I expected him to pull over into the convenience store's parking lot, but he zoomed past it. I said something like, "Hey, why didn't you stop?" And he replied, "I know a public restroom closer to home." I hated that. He could have easily stopped, but he didn't. He eventually did stop, but he stopped at a public bathroom in the middle of nowhere. I doubted that there would even be cell reception, but I checked my phone before getting out, and I noticed that I had a couple of bars. I figured that I would be able to guide someone to come pick me up from here, or at least share my location, so I took my chance. I got out of the car, stood up, and then stooped to pick up my handbag. I grabbed one handle of the bag and turned to walk to the bathroom. Then, I felt some resistance. It was like my bag was stuck. I looked back and saw my date was holding the other handle of my bag. I stood there, stunned. I couldn't believe that this guy could get any worse. My eyes then met his, and he said to me, "Do you really need that if you're just using the bathroom?" I just dropped my phone in my handbag, so I couldn't even grab that. I froze. I really didn't know what to do. I couldn't be left out in the middle of nowhere with no bag, no phone, and no coat. I wasn't really paying attention to what roads we'd been on, so I didn't know how long it would take me to get home. I reluctantly had to get back into that creep's car. We set off. I had to hide my fear from him. He was controlling, but he wasn't going to beat me. I didn't want him to think he had some kind of power over me. I didn't want to give him that victory. I next tried to hint that it was hot and I needed something to drink. I was surprised that he really didn't need all that much convincing. I guessed that he was thirsty too. I mean, at this point, we'd been driving around and around for a couple of hours. As we approached a convenience store, he parked up in the furthest spot away and said he would be right back. He darted out of the car, and I thought to myself, now's my chance. I tried to make a break for it as he ran into the store, but the door would not budge. He must have locked the door. He came back, and he had a big smile on his face. As soon as he opened his door, I shot across into his seat and pushed my weight against the door. This caused him to back up a bit. I told him that if he didn't leave me alone, that I would be calling the police. One of the convenience store staff members stepped out at the perfect time to take the garbage bags out and was alerted to our heated exchange. When he realized that he was being watched, he tutted at me and shook his head. He then got into his car and sped away. I called a taxi and got myself home. I was shaken up, but I tried my best to hold it together until I was behind a closed door. Then it all came out. I was really upset. I later found out when I spoke to the police about him that he stalked his ex-girlfriend and had an official police caution just a month before we went out on our driving date. It feels amazing to be saying that I got home in one piece because I truly don't know what that guy is capable of. I hope I never run into him again. This was a situation a couple weeks back that left a bad taste in my mouth per se. For context, it might be a bit long, but hopefully it will give a bit of background to what made this encounter so creepy for me. This encounter happened about around the time lockdown was in its prime here in Australia. I'm a 23-year-old female living near Byron Bay, about a 20-minute drive away in the surrounding hinterlands. I was born and raised in the city though, so I like to think my judgment of character is a bit finer developed than country folk. For those not familiar, Byron is a major tourist attraction in northern New South Wales, really close to the Queensland's border. It's a beachside town known for its laid-back lifestyle. Because of this, we get a lot of passerbys, even a bit further out because of the nice views in rich bushland, those kind of reasons. And it's not unusual to meet a few odd people here and there. There's also your dose of strange activity, i.e. backpacker Theo Hayes' disappearance not long ago. Lots of people up here have theories on this, ranging from cults to just straight-up cold-blooded murder. In my suburb, it's still quite rural. On our street, there's about 5 houses in total, covering a good couple of 100 acres. And at the end of the street, there's a path to a bush to a lovely waterfall. The journey from my property to the beginning of the track is about 5 minutes, and the path leads to 2 destinations. The first destination is about 5 minutes into the track at the top of the waterfall. It has a little wooden platform you can stand on to look out over the waterfall and the stream leading into it. The second is about another 5 minutes down the track, which is the waterfall itself. Most people keep to the left of the waterfall and will sit under it in the cave, as the almost non-existent clearing to the right of it is quite inconvenient and tricky to get to if you aren't planning on getting really wet. This is important for later. I used to go there quite often to write in my journal and clear my head, and my favorite place is just next to the top of the waterfall. I'd climb through the fence next to the wooden platform and sit next to the stream on the rocky face that covers either side of the stream. The view was the nicest here, and I also like to sit facing the wooden platform so I could keep better tabs on my environment. This particular day I went down, and coming up to the track, I noticed a camper van parked with lots of tools and rope attached to the roof. I couldn't see anyone in there, but just had a bit of an inkling there was, so I gave the car a pretty wide berth. Social distancing, but also my ever-present paranoia thanks to this and other true crime subs. And as I passed it, I noticed the side door was opened, which quickly slid shut. Straight up, I thought it was pretty fucking weird. It's illegal to set up camp there, and also we're in a period of essential travel only, so I wasn't really expecting to see anyone down there except for a neighbor going for a stroll. However, I passed it off as a tradie wanting to get out of the house into nature for a bit after work or something, and I kept on. I went to my usual riding place, but as we'd had a bout of pretty heavy rain in the few days prior, the stream was full and I wasn't up to crossing it. So I sat on the same side as the wooden platform about 10 to 15 meters away. I wasn't there for long, maybe 5 minutes of riding with my headphones in, when I heard something. It sounded like a bird over my music, so I just went back to doing what I was doing. But then a few seconds later, I saw someone out of the corner of my eye coming onto the path. I ignored them and tried to go back to what I was doing, partly because I was in a pretty foul mood and wanted to be left alone, but also because it's not really common for anyone to talk to each other out in the bush, apart from the occasional, "How you going?" passing someone on the track. So I thought maybe they were on the phone. No. He yelled out to me again, which I ignored, and then again. I got the feeling he wasn't going to let up, so I feigned surprise along the lines of, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you and I couldn't hear you over my music." He was in his late 30s to early 40s, just a pretty normal-looking guy. The rest of the conversation is hard to recall verbatim, but essentially it went like this. "Are you going to jump off the waterfall?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Why not?" he proceeded. "Because I don't know how deep the water is," I replied. "Good answer," he said. It seemed pretty harmless, and I assumed he was just visiting the falls for the first time. So I tried to cut off the conversation by going back to my writing. He didn't let up, however, and this is where it started to get a bit weird. I was already feeling quite unsettled by his presence, as he wasn't very focused on the surroundings and more on me, which was pretty strange considering the entire world is in a state of encouraging no communication at the moment. "What are you? One of those nature people who likes to come out here by themselves?" he asked. "No," I told him. "What are you doing out here then?" he asks. "Trying to clear my head and write. It's nice and quiet out here," I replied. "Am I bothering you?" he asked. "Yeah, but it's whatever," I replied to him. Honorable mention to my ADHD for making me always susceptible to saying the wrong thing and pretty much incapable of lying. There was just a bit of lull here, both of us just kind of sizing each other up, I guess. Me, just really wanting him to fuck off, but also not being too worried if he did try anything, as I had a large stick with me. It was still pretty warm out, so I always carry it with me because of snakes. "How did you get here?" he asked. "I just climbed down off the path through the fence," I told him. "No, I mean, how did you get here, to this place?" he pushed. "I walked," I replied. "Pretty long walk to be out here by yourself," he commented. "Not really, I just live up the road," I countered. Something about that response changed something in his behavior, but as we were pretty far apart, it was a bit hard to figure out what. Regardless, I wasn't vibing the situation at all, and I was also kicking myself for making it glaringly obvious to some random guy that I was out here alone, and also for not having told my family where I was going. Well, I guess I'll leave you to your writing. This calmed me a lot, and once again just passed him off as a passerby. I then tell him, "The view's a lot nicer under the waterfall if you follow the path down." "Oh, I don't know if I could go alone. There could be some people down there waiting to mug me. You'd have to come with me," he says. Who says shit like this, especially to someone you've just met in the middle of nowhere? "No, probably just having a picnic or a swim," I returned. He stood there for a bit longer than I would have liked, looking at me, and then finally left me alone with an, "All right, see you later," as he headed back up the path toward the parking lot, and I assumed he was going home. I still felt a bit uneasy, so I turned off my music completely and tried to go back to writing. Some time passed, but I was struggling to concentrate. But it wasn't my usual restlessness. I just felt so uncomfortable, almost exposed. So I took a break to enjoy the scenery, and I looked down at the bottom of the waterfall. And this guy is standing to the right of it, and that's exactly what he was doing, just standing there, staring at me. I thought I was just overthinking it, but no, I could literally feel his eyes on me. I noped the fuck out of there. Even if he was just a creepy guy with innocent enough intentions, I wasn't going to wait around to find out, and I'd have a 5-minute head start if he did try to follow me. So I ran back home, and what was left of my journal entry for that day was essentially just about that weird-ass guy. I waited to hear his car go by as well, but it didn't. I thought that was weird. I assumed he must have set up camp there or whatever, or just left later that night. Either way, it sufficiently creeped me out and ruined that spot for me. I haven't been back since. Thanks for listening, and stay safe out there, everyone. This took place about 4 years ago. I was driving from my grandma's house, which is about an hour from my work. It's a pretty straight shot of the interstate, and while I usually took the back roads, it was getting kind of rainy, and I just wanted to go ahead and get there and get home. My car at the time was a beater station wagon that had a tendency to sort of overheat, but not really. It would just kind of stop working. This was usually when the gas tank was getting on the low side, but it wouldn't actually be out of gas. Usually, if I let it sit for a few minutes, it'd be fine. Anyhow, I'm heading to my grandma's when the car starts its overheating/acting routine. I pulled over to the shoulder and cut the car off. I wait about 5 minutes, just sitting there smoking a cigarette. I go to start it up, and nothing. It wouldn't actually turn over. As the daughter of a well-versed car guy, I popped the hood. Not that I would actually be able to recognize exactly what was wrong, but I knew enough to at least rule some things out. I didn't notice anything major malfunctioning, so I start to make my game plan. At this point, I'm still about 40 minutes away from my destination. My dad is a good hour and a half from me, and I know if I go that route, there's bound to be a lecture I don't want. So I decide to call the roadside assistance number in my state. The dispatcher is very nice, lets me know that a tech should be there in about 30 minutes. So I start to settle in my car to wait while the rain sprinkles outside. After about 15 minutes or so, a car pulls up in front of me. It's not the DOT guy, it's a stranger in a beat-up 80s Monte Carlo. He starts to walk to my car. Just so you know, I live in the South. It's not out of character for someone to stop and help you. Anyhow, I watch as the man approaches. He's 6'3" or so, and built like he might work in manual labor. I roll the window down about 3 inches, because it's raining and I don't know this person. He gets close to the window and asks if I need help. I thank him immediately, but let him know that no, I'm good, and I'm waiting for the DOT guy to show up. He says, I work on cars, want me to take a look and see if it's a loose wire or something. I thought it was a nice offer, because I'm a little too trusting, and I say sure. I pop the hood again and get out of the car to look with him. I know, stupid decision, but again, I'm pretty trusting. He fumbles around a little with various wires that are perfectly fine, making small talk about how he was coming from a local army base from visiting his daughter and heading back to his home that's in a neighboring state and whatever else. I found it a bit odd. I mean, it could have been legit, but he was wearing really dusty and dirty clothes, jeans with huge holes in the knees, and he just didn't look clean. Not that you would go to the base in your Sunday clothes, but chances are you would have showered. So then he starts saying, "Well, it doesn't look like your roadside assistance is coming." He said it almost accusingly, as if I had never called them and made that up when he first got to my car. Still being doe-eyed, I said, "Actually, he should be here any minute." That's when it got weird and my spidey sense finally started tingling. The rain is getting a little heavier by the minute. He looks at me, well, mostly at my chest, and his energy, for lack of a better term, changes, and he offers to take me to the McDonald's off the next exit for a cup of coffee to get out of the rain. I thanked him for the offer, but said no thanks. He said, "It's right up there," pointing about a quarter of a mile up the road. We'd be able to see the dot guy. I thanked him again, and again declined, saying I'd be fine in my car, no biggie. He started to get more and more aggressive in his offer, saying things like, "Come on, it's right there, 1 cup, my treat," and "My daughter's a soldier. I wouldn't try anything weird on you. Just hop in the car and we'll go right there." Each time he says something, he moves a bit closer to me. The little voice in your head that goes off kept saying, "Keep acting dumb. Keep acting polite. Keep refusing. Get in your car and lock the door, you colossal moron." Finally, when I told him that I really appreciated his offer, but since I didn't know him from Adam, I just wasn't comfortable doing that. But how incredibly kind it was for him to stop and be so helpful, and that I really hoped he had a great day. He finally relented. I had been edging my way to my door as the rain hit its crescendo. Once in the safety of my car, I locked all the doors and watched him walk back to his car and drive away. Not 5 minutes later, the dot tech arrives. He comes up to my passenger side window as the rain has pretty much returned to a light drizzle. I get out and tell him the story of the man and what transpired. He gets this horrified look on his face and says, "You do realize you would never have been heard from again if you had gotten into that car." I explained that when the guy kept being pushy about it, the alarm bells finally sounded, and all I could think to do was continue to be polite but firm so that he didn't get offended or angry and snap and do God only knows what. He told me I should have never gotten out of the car, and I should immediately thank my guardian angel. I'm pretty certain I was a frog's hair from being found in a garbage bag. The summer of 1997, I was 9 and scared of my own shadow, so this experience only furthered my fear of the world. My mom and I drove up from Revere, Massachusetts, to Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire to camp. My dad was going to drive up the next morning to meet us because he had work. So, everything was going normal at the campsite. We set up the tent, built our fire. All was well. It was still daylight when we noticed that the lone greasy-haired man in the campsite connected to ours was continually running and leaping onto a wooden post, then attempting to balance himself on one foot. He kept doing this over and over and over. It was odd, but we just figured he was some lonely kook, and we had a good laugh at his expense. My mom thought maybe he was trying out for the circus. Cut to nighttime. Absolute darkness, if not for the campfire. My mom and I were sitting and roasting s'mores over the flames when we heard footsteps approaching from the other campsite. Out of the pines, the lone man stumbled onto our campsite, and he was ghastly and ragged in the firelight. I could tell my mom was tense. She asked the stranger what he needed. "Hey," he mumbled, "I need your help in my campsite." We waited, and he didn't go. My mom asked what he needed help with. The filthy man said, "I locked my keys in my van. I need you to come over and help me." He then looked at me and said, "Don't worry, kid. You can stay here with your fire." I remember getting goosebumps at that. My mom said, I don't know how I can help you with your lost keys. You must have a spare hanger lying around somewhere, suggested the man. My mom told him that she didn't. The ghoulish man wouldn't let up though. Yeah, you must have a hanger lying around here somewhere. Maybe you dropped one on the ground near your tent. My mom adamantly told him she did not have a hanger and quickly added, "My husband will be here soon. Maybe he can help you. He's a pretty strong guy." Yeah, all right. The creep slurred, and he started to trudge away into the dark. But he turned his head and said, "Well, if you do find a hanger, come help me. I'll be here." And with that, the horrible man left. My mom and I barely slept that night. I felt her moving at every sound outside the tent. Looking back, my poor mother must have stayed up through the long night, worrying a butcher knife was going to slash through the tent wall. And so, morning eventually came, and when we stepped out of the tent, we immediately saw that the lone man and his camper van were gone. Later that day, I heard my mom exclaim. I ran over to her and watched as she picked something up from the ground beside our tent. She held it between us, staring at it, not speaking. It was a metal hanger. I found out later in life that 4 dead females were found stuffed into metal barrels in Bear Brook State Park back in the 80s. I'm a Canadian student studying in the UK, and I'm currently traveling home to see my family. I typically fly out of Manchester as it's simpler to get to from the northern part of the UK where I'm living. But I found a flight that leaves early tomorrow morning, or today now I guess, that I couldn't pass up. The problem is, it takes quite a few hours to get to the airport from where I live, so I ended up having to take the train from downtown London to Gatwick Airport from 2 to 3 a.m. I waited mostly alone for an hour for my train to arrive, but about 20 minutes beforehand, a guy comes in and sits on a bench about 20 feet from me. I immediately got a bad vibe, but I figured there's security cameras, and he was far enough away, so I just forgot about it. The train arrived at 2 a.m., and the journey takes just over an hour. As it pulled up, I had this urge to walk away from this man and sit in a different compartment with more people. But when I turned to walk away, he gestured to help with my bags, and I ended up getting into the compartment that pulled in front of us. There was only this man and one other in the compartment with me, neither one with luggage, which struck me as odd on a train headed to the airport. One of the men was sitting a few rows in front of me, and one a few rows behind. I felt very uneasy, but I felt slightly trapped, so I decided to keep an eye on the man in front of me by watching his reflection in the window. He kept muttering things to himself, looking at me and smirking, and had multiple short phone conversations in a hushed voice. The man behind me was doing similar things. After a few stops, another man got on, which calmed my nerves, but seemed to annoy the man in front of me. He then moved seats to a row closer to me, and now within his eye line, where he pretended to read a book while staring at me intermittently over it. He was close enough now that in his next phone conversation, I could make out the phrase, "Yeah, not now." There was one stop left before the airport, and the third man got up to get ready to exit. I can't explain the feeling of fear I felt, thinking I'd be alone in this compartment with these 2 men, as I fumbled with my keys to get them between my fingers, in the horrible case that I'd have to fight them off. The man in front of me got up again and moved behind me a row away where the other man was sitting, and I heard a faint, "Yeah, let's go for it." At this point, I saw my opportunity, and I guess my body decided on flight rather than fight, as I picked up all my bags and hauled ass past the man about to get off and into the next compartment. Thankfully, there were a few people there, and I was able to relax. When we arrived at the airport, I tried to stay with the group getting off, as I knew the two other men would be exiting as well. But in my confusion, finding the way to the terminal, the man from in front caught up to me. I veered off over by some station employees and dawdled there while I waited for him to leave. He kept looking over at me as he paced around a bit before leaving. I watched him go up the escalator, staring at me as he ascended. I waited a minute and figured he'd given up, so I stepped onto the escalator. As soon as I reached the top, I saw the man standing there staring at me, so I quickly shouted to another employee, asking them if they would show me the way to the terminal. Thankfully, it was close by, and I was soon in the safety of the airport. Obviously, there's no way to know if I was just being paranoid, but I sincerely believe that there's something built into our genetics that lets us know when we're in danger. I'm not typically a paranoid person, and wasn't originally nervous about traveling in London alone, nor was I scared or uneasy around any of the other men I encountered tonight. But something about these guys told me to get the fuck out of there fast, and I'd rather have overreacted than end up in a dangerous situation. The common thread across every story tonight isn't just the presence of malice. In almost every single encounter, there was a quiet alarm bell ringing in the gut, a voice telling them to get out. As you head out into the wilderness this summer, remember that isolation is a privilege, but it is also a vulnerability. Never apologize for your paranoia when you're out on the trails or setting up camp. Never prioritize politeness over your survival. Trust what your senses are trying to tell you. Thank you for listening, guys. If you want to support the channel, consider joining our Patreon or following the podcast on Spotify. Stay safe in the woods this summer, and until next time.